The church has always been at its best when it asks hard questions about the tools it adopts and what those tools cost. And I think this is one of those moments. The question at the center of all of this isn't really about AI. It never was about AI. The real question is whether or not you showed up and whether or not I showed up. While no one has asked me these exact words, when I mention AI to people in my congregation, I can just see their faces glaze over as they're wondering if it's actually cheating or not. And I want to give that question the honest answer that it deserves. This is not a defensive answer, not a marketing pitch for AI, but an actual answer from a pastor who uses these tools and has spent real time thinking about whether he should. So here's the answer. It depends. I'm still working some of this out, so what I'd like to do is just explain what I mean. There are really 6 objections that I hear, sometimes out loud, more often in the look on someone's face, and I'd like to take each one of them and kind of think through them individually. The first one is that AI produces inauthentic content that isn't really mine. And I understand this one. I think it's worth asking seriously. But here's where I land. Authenticity isn't about whether you used a tool. It's about whether what comes out on the other end is genuinely yours. Think about the tools that we've already decided are fine. Commentaries written by other scholars, studies tools that surface connections you'd never find on your own, basic search engines that in 10 seconds give you access to more information than a seminary library could have 30 years ago. We use PowerPoint instead of transparency projectors and social media to reach people you'd never reach from a pulpit. Even the printing press, which, by the way, a lot of people in the church were deeply suspicious of when it arrived. Every single one of these tools changed what was possible. Every single one of them had people asking whether something important was being lost, and every single one of them ended up being just a tool. A tool that is useful when used well and harmful when used badly. AI is the next one on that list. It's not the last one. It's just the next one. The question was never really about the tool. It was always about what you do with it. Now, the second objection that I hear sometimes is that it's lazy, that pastors should do the hard work. And honestly, this one has some truth to it. If you're using AI to avoid thinking or to skip the wrestling or to produce something that sounds like a sermon without actually sitting with the text, that's a problem. Not because AI was involved, but because the pastor checked out. Here's the thing. I've never had a week where using AI meant I did less thinking. Now, I've had weeks where it meant I did better thinking because I wasn't spending 2 hours on research logistics and I could actually spend time with the text, with the passage, with the question of what it means for the specific people who are going to be sitting in front of me on Sunday. You see, the hard work of ministry is not the research. The hard work of ministry is the discernment. It's the application. It's the pastoral judgment, the knowing your congregation well enough to know which truth they need to hear this week and how to say it in a way that they can actually receive. AI can't do that. It doesn't know your congregation. It doesn't know who's sitting in the third row going through a divorce, or who just got a diagnosis, or who came back for the first time since COVID this week. That part is up to you. That part will always be yours. Now, there's a third objection I hear sometimes as well, and that has to do with theological errors. What if AI gets theology wrong? And this one is super real and it's worth taking seriously. Look, AI can and does produce theologically imprecise content. It will sometimes flatten nuance, miss context, or confidently state something that needs significant qualification. And here's the thing. So do commentaries. So does Google. So does the person you ask for advice. The answer to theological error risk isn't to not use the tool. It's for you to be the expert who discerns it. To read what comes back with a critical eye, to know your theology well enough to catch what's wrong. If you're using AI output without reading it carefully, that's not AI problems. That's a pastoral formation problem. The tool is only as reliable as the judgment of the person using it. And sometimes it can be used really well there, where you hear different voices than you would have otherwise. Now, the fourth objection is one that doesn't get talked enough about in these conversations. And that's basically the idea that AI harms creatives. These tools were trained on human creative work, like writing and art and music, and much of that was without the consent of the people who made it. That's a real ethical problem, and it connects to something way bigger. The way AI is already displacing human creative labor in ways that are genuinely harmful to real people who deserve to be compensated for their work. Now look, I don't have a clean answer for this one. I think it's a legitimate concern, and I think that the church should be amongst the voices saying so. But what I think is that there's a difference between using AI to replace human creative work entirely and using it as a research assistant and a thinking partner. Now, that's a distinction I kind of have to hold loosely. It's one that I'm still working out, and I honestly think it's the best way to say it, rather than just wave it away. The fifth objection is one that I think people in community like ours feel even if they don't always name it. We hear about the environmental cost a lot. AI runs on massive data centers, and those data centers consume enormous amounts of electricity and water. Water for cooling, energy for computing, and the estimates are significant enough that some researchers have started tracking the carbon footprint of individual AI queries to the way that we track carbon footprints for things like flights. And it's not nothing. For a community that takes care of creation seriously, that matters. Again, this is one of those areas that I don't have a perfectly clean answer. But I do think there's some honesty that needs to be happening here. First, there's a real concern, and the church should be amongst the communities raising it. The environmental cost of AI at scale is a legitimate part of the broader conversation about how this technology gets developed and deployed. If you care about creation care, and I think we have to do that, then this belongs on our radar. Second, I think there's a meaningful difference between AI being used at the industrial scale to generate content that displaces human workers and human creativity, and a pastor who uses it for a few minutes of research or outlining once a week. Now, I know this is the distinction without a difference, maybe. I don't think it resolves the concern fully, but I do think scale matters when we're talking about environmental impact. But the third thing I think about the environmental part, and this is maybe the most honest piece, is that every tool that we use has an environmental cost. The servers that run your church's email, the electricity that powers your Sunday morning production, the printing of this bulletin, the commute to church. We make stewardship decisions constantly about which costs are worth bearing for which purpose. I think that's the right frame for us to think about AI as well. Not whether it has any cost, which it does, but whether the cost is proportionate to the purpose and whether we're being honest about it. What I won't do is pretend that the cost isn't there. It is. And if you're someone who weighs those things carefully, I think that's the right instinct. The sixth and final objection is basically transparency. Congregations deserve to know if AI was involved. And while this isn't perfect, it's where I land. It depends on how much AI was being involved. If AI helps me find a list of commentators or suggest a sharper way to phrase a point that I then rewrote in my own voice, I don't think I owe a disclosure any more than I disclose which commentary I read or which conversation I was having or if I used Google or Bing. Thinking is mine. The pastoral judgment is mine. The words that come out on Sunday are mine. But if AI wrote significant portions of what I said and then I delivered it without engaging in it, that's different. That's something the congregation probably does deserve to know. Not, by the way, because AI was involved, but because the pastoral relationship that we need involves a kind of authenticity that matters. The line for me is whether I could defend every word as genuinely reflecting my thinking. If I can, then maybe disclosure isn't required. And if I can't, the problem isn't the disclosure question. The problem is that I didn't do my job. So, is AI cheating? Well, here's the short answer. Using AI as a tool, as a research assistant, as a thinking partner, I don't think so. Any more than using a commentary is cheating, or preparing a sermon on a computer instead of writing it out by hand. But using AI as a replacement for the pastoral work, the discernment, the application, the genuine engagement with your text and your people, yeah, I think that's cheating. Not because AI was involved, because that's not the case, but because the pastor wasn't. And on the bigger questions, the creative harm, the environmental cost, I think the honest answer is that these are real concerns that deserve real ongoing attention. They don't deserve dismissal. It's not hand-waving. but real attention. The church has always been at its best when it asks hard questions about the tools it adopts and what those tools cost. And I think this is one of those moments. The question at the center of all of this isn't really about AI. It never was about AI. The real question is whether or not you showed up and whether or not I showed up. It's whether you did the work that only you can do, whether the person who stands up on Sunday actually wrestled with the text, actually sat with it, and whether they actually have something to say that comes from somewhere real, or if they're just saying something. If the answer to that is yes, the tools that you use to get there are between you and the Creator. And that's my honest answer. I'm still working some of this out. And next week, for example, I'm going to be showing you a specific workflow for using AI to write church communication like bulletins and emails and social posts. And a lot of that is to save the time that it can use so that you can spend that doing other pastoral pieces. Now, if that sounds useful, you can subscribe so you don't miss it. The link to the last week's sermon prep video is also in the description if you missed it. I'd love it if you check that out. And I'll see you next week.